pair fell in the San Francisco Bay Area from the late 1960s into the early 1970s. A man terrorized the people with the self-proclaimed name of the Zodiac Killer. He sent letters, ciphers, and codes to police to try and gain attention. He claimed he had 37 victims, but the police can only directly link him to 5. The most terrifying part is that he was never caught. The Zodiac Killer's known crimes took place in Benicia, Vallejo, Napa County, and San Francisco. The first confirmed victims of the Zodiac were 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen on December 20th, 1968. The young couple were on their first date and were supposed to attend a Christmas concert at Hogan High School, just blocks from Betty Lou's home. The couple stopped and saw a friend before going for a meal at a local restaurant. Instead of attending the concert as they had planned, they drove out to Lake Herman Road and parked on a gravel turnout known to the youth as Lover's Lane at 10:15 p.m. Shortly after 11 p.m., their bodies were found by Stella Burks, who lived nearby. Robert Graysmith used forensic data to set the scene of the crime. It's believed another car pulled in beside the young couple just before 11. It's likely that the killer exited their vehicle and ordered the couple out of theirs. Betty Lou seemed to have been the first one to exit. David was only halfway out of the car when he was shot in the head. Betty had been shot 5 times in the back, and her body was found 28 feet from the car, showing that she had most likely been trying to run away. The next confirmed victims of the Zodiac Killer are 19-year-old Michael Magg and 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin. In the late hours of 4th of July in 1969, just before midnight, the couple drove out to Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, just 4 miles from the Lake Herman murder site, and parked. While the couple sat, a second car pulled up beside them and then almost immediately left, only to return 10 minutes later. The second car parked behind them, before the driver exited the vehicle and approached on the passenger side. The killer shined a flashlight into the couple's eyes before opening fire on them, firing his 9mm 5 times. The killer began to walk away, but after hearing Michael moaning in pain, the killer returned to the car and shot each victim twice more before driving off. At 12:40 a.m. on July 5th, the police received a phone call from a phone booth at a gas station at Spring Road, just a few blocks from the Vallejo Police Department, and only 500 meters from Darlene's home. The caller reported the murder and claimed responsibility for it, and for the murders of the couple on the Lake Herman Road just 6 months prior. Darlene was pronounced dead at the hospital, but Michael survived the brutal attack, despite being shot in the neck, face, and chest. He was able to give police the first description of the killer. They were looking for a white male who looked to be between 26 and 30 years old, stood around 5 feet 8 inches and around 200 pounds with short, curly, light brown hair. On August 1st, 1969, nearly a month after the attack on Michael and Darlene, 3 letters were received. Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicles, and the San Francisco Examiner each received a letter. In the letter, the person took credit for the murders of each couple and included 1/3 of a cryptogram to each paper to make up the entirety of the 408 cipher. The killer claimed it would reveal his identity if they could solve it. The killer also demanded that the letter be printed on the front page of each paper, or he'd, quote, cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night and move on to kill again until I end up with a dozen people over the weekend, end quote. The Chronicle ended up printing its third of the cryptogram on page 4 with a quote from the police chief saying, quote, "We're not satisfied that the letter was written by the murderer," end quote, and then requested for the writer to send a second letter with more proof of his involvement to the crimes. On August 7th, a letter was received at the San Francisco Examiner that read, "Dear Editor, this is the Zodiac speaking. In answer to your asking for more details about the good times I had in Vallejo, I shall be very happy to supply even more material. By the way, are the police having a good time with the code? If not, tell them to cheer up. When they do crack it, they will have me." On the 4th of July, I did not open the car door. The window was rolled down already. The boy was originally sitting in the front seat when I began firing. When I fired the first shot at his head, he leaped backwards at the same time, thus spoiling my aim. He ended up in the back seat, then on the floor in the back, thrashing out very violently with his legs. That's how I shot him in the knee. I did not leave the scene of the killing with squealing tires and racing engine as described in the Vallejo paper. I drove away quite slowly as to not draw attention to my car. The man who told police that my car was brown was a black male around 40 to 45, rather shabbily dressed. I was in this phone booth having some fun with the Vallejo cop when he was walking by. When I hung up the phone, the damn thing began to ring, and that drew his attention to me and my car. Last Christmas, in that episode, the police were wondering how I could shoot and hit my victims in the dark. They did not openly state this, but implied this by saying it was a well-lit night, and I could see silhouettes on the horizon. Bullshit. That area is surrounded by high hills and trees. What I did was tape a small pencil flashlight to the barrel of my gun. If you notice, in the center of the beam of light, you can aim it at a wall or a ceiling. You'll see a black or dark spot in the center of the light circle about 3 to 6 inches across. When taped to the barrel of the gun, the bullet will strike in the center of the black dot in the light. All I had to do was spray them as if it was a water hose. There was no need to use gun sights. I was not happy to see that I did not get the front page coverage." End quote. This letter was the first time that the Zodiac killer had given himself any kind of name. He signed the letter with the Zodiac symbol, a circle with a crosshair within. On August 8th, the 408 cipher was cracked by Donald and Betty Hardin. The message was full of spelling errors that referenced the most dangerous game. He also stated that he was collecting slaves for the afterlife, but no name could be found within the code as the killer had claimed. The next victims of the Zodiac were 20-year-old Brian Hartnell and 22-year-old Cecilia Shepard. On September 27th, the Pacific Union College students went to Lake Barissa for a picnic on the small island connected by a sand split to Twin Oak Ridge. A man around 5'11" approached them wearing an executioner's hood with a circle with a cross at the bottom, and clip-on glasses over the holes cut in the hood for his eyes. The man ordered Cecilia to tie Brian up before the killer tied her up. Despite the man having a gun, he pulled a knife and began stabbing the couple repeatedly. Brian received 6 wounds and Cecilia received 10. The killer then hiked up to the couple's car and drew the Zodiac symbol on the door, followed by, quote, Vallejo 12/20/68, 7/4/69, September 27th, 69, 6:30 by knife, end quote. At 7:40 p.m., a phone call was received at the Napa County Sheriff's Office. The killer was reported saying that he'd like to, quote, to report a murder, no, a double murder, end quote. The phone used was just blocks from the sheriff's office, and it was even still off the hook when it was found minutes later. The police found a wet palm print, but were never able to use it for identification purposes. The crime scene was 27 miles away from the payphone used to report the murder. When the police arrived, Cecilia was conscious and able to give the police a second description of the man. Unfortunately, she slipped into a coma and never regained consciousness before dying 2 days later. Brian recovered fully from the brutal attack. 2 weeks after the attack on Cecilia and Brian, on October 11, 1969, a white male entered a cab driven by Paul Stein at the intersection of Mason and Eerie. He requested to be taken to Washington and Maple Streets. No one knows why, but Paul drove past Maple onto Cherry, which was 1 block further than he was supposed to go. The passenger then shot Paul in the back of the head with a 9mm, stole his keys and wallet, then tore away a piece of Paul's shirt tail. 3 teenagers called the cops while the crime was occurring. They had watched the man wipe the cab down before he took off walking north towards the Presidio. The teenagers gave a description of the man: a white male between 25 and 30 with a crew cut and stood around 5'8". A patrol officer saw a male that had the same crew cut but appeared to be closer to 40, so the officer drove past. Unfortunately, time was lost due to dispatch informing the officers initially that they were looking for a black suspect instead of white. The only real evidence left for the crime were bloody partial fingerprints left on the driver's side driving panel, but police were unable to identify anybody with them. The murder was initially thought to be a robbery gone wrong, but then a letter was received by the San Francisco Chronicle including the piece of the bloody shirt on October 14th. The letter also included a plot to kill school children, stating, quote, "Just shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out," end quote. On November 8th, the 340 cipher was received. This cipher had gone unsolved for 51 years until just recently, on the 5th of December 2020, a credible solution had been put forth, saying as, quote, "I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner. Because I now have enough slaves to work for me, where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I'm not afraid because I know that my new life will be an easy one in paradise, death." There was no punctuation, and the letters were all capitalized. It also included paradise as being misspelled. It must be noted that all of the Zodiac's letters include misspellings and poor grammar. On November 9th, a 7-page letter was received stating the following, quote, "I've grown rather angry with the police for their telling lies about me. P.S. 2 cops pulled a goof about 3 minutes after I left the cab. I was walking down the hill to the park when this cop car pulled up, and one of them called me over and asked if I saw anyone acting suspicious or strange in the last 5 to 10 minutes. I said yes, there was this man who was running and waving a gun, and the cops peeled rubber and went around the corner as I directed them. I disappeared into the park a block and a half away, never to be seen again. By the way, it could be rather messy if you try to bluff me. P.S. Be sure to print the part I marked out on page 3, or I shall do my thing. To prove that I am the Zodiac, ask the Vallejo cop about my electric gun sight, which I used to start my collecting of slaves," end quote. The Zodiac Killer went on communicating with the police into 1970. A letter sent to the press, April 20th, 1970, he wrote, quote, "My name is blank," followed by a 13-character code. The letter also included his detailed plan to blow up a school bus. The Zodiac also made it known that he was not involved in the bombing of a police station, but stated, quote, "There is more glory in killing a cop than a kid, because a cop can shoot back," end quote. There was a detailed diagram of his bombing plan included. On April 28, 1970, he sent a greeting card to the Chronicle saying, quote, "I hope you enjoy yourselves when I have my blast," end quote. He also included the threat of using the bus bomb if they didn't publish the full details of his work. True to his level of stability, he also stated that he would like people to begin wearing Zodiac buttons. On June 26, 1970, he seemed upset by the fact people were not wearing the buttons. He also claimed that he shot a man who was sitting in his car with a .38 caliber pistol. Police believed he was referring to the murder of a police sergeant who had been shot in the head while writing a parking ticket. Police don't actually believe that the Zodiac had anything to do with it, but rather was claiming things out of spite. The murder still remains unsolved, though. Included in the same letter was a Phillips 66 map of the Bay Area. On the image of Mount Diablo, the killer had drawn the same circle symbol with a cross. At the top of the circle, he had written the numbers 0, 3, 6, and 9. There was also a 32-character cipher that the Zodiac claimed would lead to the location of a bomb he had buried and set to go off during the fall. The code was never solved, but the bomb was never reported to go off, if it did exist. In July 1970, he took credit for an abduction that had taken place 4 months before, where a woman and her daughter were flagged down by another car. The male driver told her that her wheel had been wobbling and offered to fix it. After he left, her wheel did fall off, and the man returned, offering to give them a ride. The man didn't stop at any of the rest stops they passed, and the pair were stuck for 90 minutes inside his car with him. The woman, Kathleen, and her daughter jumped from the car when he had to stop at an intersection, and they hid in a field. It must be noted, one report says that he looked for her with a flashlight before leaving. The other says that he never got out of the car. On July 26th, the Zodiac paraphrased a song from the Mikado, changing the lyrics to how he planned on torturing his slaves in paradise. On October 7th, 1970, the Chronicle received a card signed by the Zodiac and the Zodiac symbol reportedly drawn out in blood. The card's message was constructed by words and letters that had been cut from the Chronicle's printings. 13 holes were punched across the card. Inspectors believe that the card did come from the Zodiac. October 27, 1970, Paul Avery, who was a reporter at the Chronicle, received a Halloween card that read, quote, "Peekaboo, you are doomed," end quote. The threat was taken seriously and was printed on the front page. After, Avery received a letter noting the similarities to a murder that had happened in 1966, nearly 400 miles away. October 30th, 1966, Sherry Jo Bates spent the late afternoon hours at the Riverside Community College Library until it closed at 9 p.m. A scream was reported around 10:30 p.m., but Sherry wasn't found until the morning, not far from the library, between two houses scheduled to be torn down. Her car had been tampered with, so it wouldn't start, and a man's watch was found nearby with the time stuck at 12:24 a.m. Sherry had been brutally beat and stabbed to death. A month after her murder, on November 29, 1966, typewritten letters were mailed to the Riverside Police and the Riverside Press Enterprise. The letters were nearly identical, entitled, quote, "The Confession," end quote. The author took credit for the murder and stated that Sherry wasn't the first and she wouldn't be the last. The author also included details of the crime that weren't released to the public, solidifying the belief that the author was the killer. In December of the same year, a poem was found carved into the bottom of a desk at the Riverside City College Library. The poem was titled, quote, "Sick of living / unwilling to die," end quote. The letters and the writing style were strongly reflected in the Zodiac's own writings. The poem was signed with what was believed to be the initials R.H. April 30th, 1967, 6 months after Sherry's murder, her father Joseph, the press, and the Riverside Police all received almost identical letters. The press's copy and the police's copy read, quote, "Bates had to die, there will be more," end quote, with a small scribble that looked like the letter Z at the end. Joseph's letter read, quote, "She had to die, there will be more," end quote, without the scribble at the end. In 1971, the Zodiac sent a letter congratulating the police, rather than Avery, for making the connection between him and Sherry's murder. The Riverside Police Department remained that her murder was not done by the Zodiac. March 22, 1971, Avery received the Pines letter. This one was made from newspaper advertisements and magazine lettering, where the Zodiac claimed the responsibility of the disappearance of Donna Lass from September 6, 1970. Lass had been a nurse at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino. She worked until 2 a.m. on the 6th. Later that same day, her employer and landlord received phone calls from an unknown male claiming that she had to leave town due to a family emergency. No evidence has been found to determine the Zodiac's involvement, but they do feel like the letter was sent from him. His final thought to be possible victims of the Zodiac are Robert Domingos and his fiancée Linda Edwards. They were seniors in high school, and on June 4, 1963, they skipped school for senior skip day. The police believe the killer tried to restrain them, but they managed to get free and run. The killer shot them repeatedly in the back with a .22 caliber weapon. The killer then placed them in a small shack and tried to burn it down, but was unsuccessful. After the Pines letter, the Zodiac disappeared for 3 years. No letters, murders, or calls. Then, in Zodiac fashion, a letter was postmarked to the Chronicle on January 29, 1974. The letter mentioned the movie The Exorcist, praising it as, quote, "the best satirical comedy that I have ever seen," end quote. It also had a small excerpt of the Mikado, and of course, the signature cross circle. The letter also included the score, quoted as, "Me, 37, San Francisco PD, 0, end quote. No arrests have ever been made for the Zodiac killer. There have been plenty of people of interest, but so far none have panned out enough to determine for sure who he was. Investigations are still open in all of the counties, and the internet communities have their own theories, and I'm sure there's plenty of conspiracies, but I'm not here to add to them. But it is kind of crazy that someone who had killed so many people and claimed to kill so many more managed to taunt the police and the press without ever being caught. If you have any theories, let me know down below. Otherwise, be safe, be smart, and make good decisions.